100 years of oxygen. Anthony Mack was stuck in that old familiar dream again, wandering the streets of Los Angeles. It was a fictitious version of LA that only existed in his dreams and changed only slightly from dream to dream. He was trying to find his car, and it had just hit him that not only had he forgotten where he parked, he'd also lost his phone and his car keys. The trifecta. The region of Dream LA was the only thing that changed. Sometimes he was up in the hills. Sometimes he was downtown. This time he happened to be in Santa Monica. But it always ended with him being stranded like this. He'd been having this dream from time to time for the past 15 years, since he moved out of LA to enlist in the Star Command, stationed in Houston. If only he had known then that this dream of being stranded would foreshadow what was going on now. As Dream Santa Monica's sky changed, Anthony began to hear a rhythmic sound. Breathing. His own. He slowly realized he'd gone to sleep with his visor up again. The city streets of Dream Santa Monica began to swirl before his eyes, looking momentarily like a Van Gogh. Then the light colors became white, the dark colors became black until he was fully awake. The sights and sounds of his dream gone now, he was alone once again with his breathing. And the only sight he had seen for the past. Anthony checked the time/date readout on his helmet's peripheral LED, 8 days. It had been 8 days since the Sparrow warped out, catapulting him into space, twirling, cartwheeling, faster than any human being had ever been launched without a spaceship. Even now, Anthony wondered how fast he was traveling. Thousands of miles per hour for sure. Maybe tens of thousands. No air out here, no friction. If he was in Earth's atmosphere, he'd have been ripped apart in the blink of an eye. Nothing out here. He was perfectly intact, surrounded only by the second greatest achievement in space travel history. The Century Suit. A spacesuit designed to keep an astronaut alive for 100 years, powered by a battery guaranteed for the life of the astronaut. A monument of the modern age. Somebody had figured out how to recycle everything. Carbon dioxide got turned into oxygen in real time. For the next 6 years, the intravenous packets feeding him food and water would run out. By then, microbes inside his suit will have started to convert his waste into nutrients. Don't ask Anthony how. He was just a space jockey, not one of the big brains who created the Century Suit or the first greatest achievement in space travel. The Sparrow. An FTL, faster-than-light starship, that could conquer interstellar stretches of space in mere minutes. How was this possible? The ship technically didn't move. It created a bubble that squeezed the space in front of it and stretched the space behind it until it reached its destination. Again, he was just a space jockey, so Anthony couldn't tell you exactly what made it possible for the warp engine to perform such a miracle of physics. But Anthony now knew one thing all of those big brains didn't. He was sure of it. They could conjecture and experiment and hypothesize till the cows came home. But not even one of those big brains knew what would happen to a human being who just so happened to be outside the Sparrow's warp bubble. What was Anthony doing outside the ship at that moment anyway? Taking care of one of the oldest problems in spaceship construction. He was tightening a loose panel. That was literally it. It was a job he never finished. The repair required an unscheduled stop somewhere between the orbital reef in NGC 63 and the gravitron in the outer arm. I know you aren't looking at a map of the Milky Way, but trust me, that is an extremely long way to travel in a normal ship. We're talking in order for light to make the trip, it would take 100,000 years. All of human history is barely that old. Anthony chuckled when he thought about how the Century Suit sent out a distress beacon, which only traveled at light speed. The nearest space station would receive it in about 4,000 years. Damn, space is big. He still couldn't figure out why the Sparrow suddenly warped out on its own. The Sparrow was not even designed to operate without a pilot. Hitting the Sparrow's brakes was a manual operation. Anthony envisioned the Sparrow passing right by the outer arm, warping into the deep, deep space between galaxies. Its engine ran on a subatomic element so small its fuel tank could go for millennia before it needed refueling. The Sparrow could conceivably hit the end of the universe. But then again, how far could it have gotten with that loose panel? It was important enough for the Sparrow to alert him to repair immediately. The Sparrow may have started falling apart the split second it warped out, littering pieces of itself across the light millennia between here and the outer arm. All Anthony could think was the Sparrow may have had bigger problems than that loose panel. A faulty ignition, maybe? As if anything like that mattered now. He wondered if the Sparrow ever made it to the outer arm, or if it's still out there warping past galaxy after galaxy. Unlike him, even at the massive speed at which he tumbled, he was like a snail in the breadth of space. Anthony had no spouse or children. The Star Command frowned on so-called family people. And Anthony was grateful he had no one close enough to miss him or be missed the way an immediate loved one would. But occasionally he would recall the faces of the people he had known. Childhood friends who would grow old, whose children would grow up and have children of their own. Lifetimes had, some dreams fulfilled, some left unrealized. All while Anthony spun the decades away, covering a distance that wouldn't even amount to a speck in this cosmic desert. The whirling turning stars outside repeated their familiar pattern. Since Anthony's spin was horizontal and vertical, his view could be considered dizzying. Although Anthony wasn't dizzy. He was pretty sure it was because dizziness was the result of gravity. It only took a split second for the star's pattern to repeat. Whirl, turn, whirl, turn, whirl, turn. Anthony casually lifted his hands and made some crude shadow puppets against the whirling field of streaking stars out there. A dog and a rabbit. He gave them voices and tried to act out some story. It was fun the first time he did it. Only 8 days in and shadow puppets were at diminishing returns. If only he could get out of the sentry suit somehow. He knew he would freeze in an instant and it would be over. But the suit would never release him in a hostile environment. There had to be a habitable atmosphere for the suit or his helmet to disengage from his body. So instead of preserving Anthony, it had imprisoned him. His life sentence, to serve as a piece of space debris hurtling through the void. He slid his visor down and welcomed the dark. It complemented the nothingness. He tumbled through a lot better than all those spinning, circling, streaking stars. He had heard there were particles of space dust that moved so fast they became lethal projectiles. A grain of sand could do as much damage as a bullet. Anthony wondered if he would be lucky enough to encounter such a grain of sand. Think about it. One grain of sand hitting a human-sized target way out here? The odds were astronomical. Anthony began praying for sleep again, even though he'd just been asleep for, checking the sleep status readout on his helmet LED, 6 hours. It was going to be a long day.